The plane vanished from radar, but 37 years later, it landed. It was a clear afternoon in 1984 when Flight 914 vanished without a trace. No distress call, no storm, no hijacking. The plane simply disappeared from radar. One moment gliding through Florida airspace, the next, gone. The search went on for weeks, no debris, no signal, no answers. It was as if the sky had swallowed the aircraft whole. But then, in 2021, a control tower in Caracas picked up a signal, an outdated transponder code. Confused, the operator looked out across the tarmac and saw a plane approaching. The logo was faded, the model no longer existed, and as it landed, emergency crews gathered, expecting a malfunction or hijack. What they found instead was the exact same aircraft, Flight 914. Same serial number, same crew uniforms, same passengers, all 128 of them. Only one thing was wrong. They were all dead, sitting upright, unmoving, eyes open, no signs of trauma, no decay, no explanation. As if they had died just minutes before landing. But the flight log inside the cockpit told a different story. One that ended in 1984 and should have never resumed. Photos were taken, the plane was sealed, governments denied everything, and the air traffic controller who first saw the aircraft, he disappeared 3 days later. No phone activity, no trace, just an empty apartment and a TV left playing static. The last thing he said to his wife was, they weren't supposed to come back. To this day, no one knows what happened to Flight 914. No black box was recovered, no evidence of a hoax, just a plane that vanished and returned 37 years later, carrying 128 passengers who should have been long buried. But what scares people the most is this. Something else might have come back with it. The flight that came back. There are stories that make headlines, and there are stories that disappear. This one did both. Flight 914 was a routine commercial trip from New York to Miami in 1984. There were no warnings, no turbulence, no technical issues. The plane left the runway at 8:13 a.m. and never arrived. Families waited at terminals. Authorities scrambled jets. But nothing was ever found. Not a wing, not a bolt, not a scream. The plane was gone. Then, in 2021, almost 4 decades later, it landed. Same plane, same uniforms, same passengers. But something was very wrong. They hadn't aged. They had rotted. All 128 were frozen in place, as if they had never known they were dead. This is not a story about aviation failure. This is a story about time, about disappearance, and about the horrifying possibility that some things return different. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe now, because what you're about to hear is one of the most disturbing and unsolved mysteries in aviation history. It'd like if unexplained events like this keep you awake at night, and drop a comment. Which country and city are you watching from? And what do you think happened to Flight 914? Because after you hear everything, you might realize this plane never truly landed. Chapter 1. The Disappearance. It was July the 2nd, 1984. Flight 914 was scheduled to depart JFK Airport at 8 a.m. sharp. It was a warm, cloudless morning, perfect flying weather. The McDonnell Douglas DC-4 taxied down the runway with 128 passengers aboard. Businessmen, honeymooners, students, retirees. Captain Michael Thompson, a seasoned pilot with 25 years of experience, greeted everyone over the intercom with a voice calm and professional. No delays, no anomalies. The plane lifted off at 8:13 a.m., climbing steadily into the sky. No one knew it would be the last time anyone saw that flight for 37 years. Air traffic control followed the plane as it headed south along its planned route to Miami. Everything was normal. Radio communication every few minutes, weather updates, course corrections. The flight cruised at 33,000 feet without incident. Then, at exactly 9:47 a.m., Flight 914's transponder signal vanished. No warning, no distress call. 1 second it was there, and the next, it was gone. Radar screens showed nothing, just blank airspace where a plane should have been. Controllers attempted immediate radio contact. No response. The emergency frequency yielded only static. They rerouted nearby aircraft to scan the area visually, but there was no sign of smoke, debris, or contrails. The Coast Guard launched a search within the hour. Military aircraft joined in. They combed the projected crash area for weeks. Nothing. It was as if the plane had been erased from the sky. The families were told what authorities feared. The aircraft likely suffered a catastrophic failure over the ocean. But behind closed doors, aviation officials were baffled. The weather had been perfect. The plane was in good mechanical condition. There was no indication of mechanical malfunction, terrorism, or pilot error. Even if it had gone down, there should have been something. Wreckage, fuel slicks, body parts. But the Atlantic was silent. The NTSB launched a full investigation. They pulled maintenance records, analyzed pilot logs, even questioned air traffic controllers for signs of sabotage. Conspiracy theories began to circulate: hijacking, alien abduction, government experiment. But none of them answered the simple question, where did it go? The flight just vanished, and the families had no closure. In New York, a mother kept setting the table for three. In Miami, a taxi driver waited outside the terminal for a client who never came. A boy turned 5 without his father. A woman gave birth without her husband beside her. The airline issued statements, offered condolences and paid settlements, but never offered an explanation, because they didn't have one, not even a theory. After 6 months, the FAA officially declared Flight 914 lost. All passengers and crew presumed dead. Memorials were held in multiple cities, names engraved on stone. Captain Thompson's name was added to the aviation wall of remembrance. The world moved on, as it always does, but for 128 families, the sky was now a grave with no body, no coffin, and no goodbye. Over the years, strange claims began to surface. A fisherman who swore he saw a plane hovering silently over the water for 10 minutes before vanishing into clouds. A shortwave radio operator who intercepted static-laced transmissions saying, "This is Flight 914, requesting landing clearance." But no proof ever followed. The files were closed. The flight forgotten until December 17, 2021. An air traffic controller in Caracas, Venezuela, picked up a transponder ping. The code was outdated, one that hadn't been used since the 1980s. Curious, he looked out the tower window. An old DC-4 was approaching the runway. No radio contact, no flight plan, just an aircraft sliding silently through the air, as if it never left. As it touched down, the wheels screeched. Dust flew. The plane rolled to a stop. The tower crew ran outside, thinking it was a museum piece, a stunt, a mistake. But when they approached the aircraft, they froze. Through the windows they saw passengers, sitting perfectly upright, eyes open, unmoving, and every single one of them looked freshly dead. Chapter 2. The Arrival. The plane stood still on the runway, its metal hull sun-bleached, its paint faded. The logo on the tail was barely legible, but the numbers were clear, N3794H. The same registration listed in the 1984 flight records. The tower crew hesitated. A veteran officer named Rivera approached first, his boots crunching over gravel and dust. The engines were off, no sound, but the air around the aircraft felt charged, like walking into a room moments after someone screamed. Emergency personnel were called in. Airport security sealed off the tarmac. They tried contacting the cockpit by radio. No response. Thermal scans showed no heat signatures, no movement. But from the outside, silhouettes were visible through the windows, still bodies, perfectly aligned, as if the flight had landed just 10 minutes ago. Aviation authorities ordered the plane not be touched until government agents arrived. But curiosity broke protocol. Rivera opened the main cabin door. It wasn't locked. It creaked like it hadn't moved in decades. A strange metallic odor rolled out, something between ozone and rotting flowers. Inside, the cabin lights flickered, dim, yellow. The kind used in older aircraft. Dust danced in the air, but the cabin itself looked pristine, not aged, not decayed, just paused. Each passenger sat in their seat, seatbelt fastened. Some had hands on their laps, others were mid-turn as if looking toward the windows. A child still clutched a stuffed animal. A man held a magazine open to an article about the Olympics. All 128 passengers were present. All lifeless. But none of them were decomposed. No skin slippage, no rigor mortis. Eyes open. Frozen, and all still warm. The strangest part? The black box wasn't found in the tail compartment. It was inside the cockpit, lying on the co-pilot's seat, intact, no visible damage. Beside it, a flight log, written in pen in Captain Thompson's handwriting. The final entry read, 9:47 a.m., all instruments malfunctioning. Fog appeared out of nowhere. Visibility 0, no response from tower. Feels like we're somewhere else. There were no entries after that. Just a single word scratched in jagged ink, "Don't land." By now, news had leaked. A journalist from a local station got aerial footage of the aircraft on the runway. Within hours, Twitter, Reddit, and dark web forums were ablaze. Was it a hoax? A time capsule experiment? A Cold War conspiracy revived? No one had answers, but families of the original passengers did. They started receiving calls, photos, requests for DNA verification. And one by one, they came forward and confirmed the impossible. An elderly woman fainted when shown a picture of her brother. His body exactly as it was the day he vanished, not a wrinkle older. A woman in California collapsed when she saw her mother's locket on the neck of one of the passengers. One by one, matches were made. Fingerprints, dental records, unmistakable proof. This wasn't a reconstruction. This was the same plane, the same people, returned from nowhere. The US. Government took over within 48 hours. The plane was moved to a secure hangar under military escort. All personnel involved were silenced with NDAs and threats. Rivera never returned to work. His family said he suffered from hallucinations and night terrors, visions of faces staring through glass, lips moving without sound. He claimed they followed him through reflections. Then, one night, he vanished, left behind only a note. It landed, but they never got off. Night enorm. Inside the sealed hangar, scientists and analysts examined the aircraft. Radiation levels were inconsistent. Geiger counters fluctuated near the cockpit. The flight instruments were 40 years out of date, but still powered on. The fuel in the tanks matched 1980s formulations, and the radio, every night at 2:13 a.m., broadcasted a single looped message. This is Flight 914, requesting landing clearance. Please respond. Even though no one had touched the controls, and then it stopped. Two weeks after the landing, the plane went dark. No lights, no signal. The bodies, once perfectly preserved, began to decay all at once, as if time had found them again, and on the hangar wall, scrawled in rust, words no one could explain. Something else came through. Chapter 3. The Silence. 3 days after the plane landed, the silence began. Not metaphorical silence, actual, suffocating silence. The first to notice was a night guard stationed near the hangar. He reported that every time he passed within 10 feet of the aircraft, his radio cut out. No static, no interference, just nothing. And his phone? The screen went black, every single time, as if something around the plane was eating sound itself. Then, people started disappearing, not from inside the plane, from the outside world. The first was a technician who had scanned the cockpit. He never returned home. His wife reported him missing, but security footage showed him walking out of the hangar, getting into his car, and then nothing. The car was found abandoned on a bridge 2 states away, keys in the ignition, but the driver's seat was empty, still warm. A week later, one of the coroners vanished. She had been performing autopsies on the bodies from Flight 912. On the morning of her disappearance, her lab was found in chaos. Papers torn, drawers open, all electrical devices fried. The only trace she left was a single voice memo on her recorder. It ended with static, and one phrase repeated 5 times. They weren't passengers, they were watchers. The file corrupted seconds later. The government tried suppressing the pattern. They rotated staff, they installed soundproof walls, they ran electromagnetic shielding tests, but nothing stopped the silence from growing. One by one, maintenance workers, guards, janitors, all began showing symptoms: nosebleeds, insomnia, hallucinations. One man gouged out his own ears and scrawled on the wall, "It speaks louder in silence." Families of the original victims began receiving strange calls. No caller ID, just long stretches of static, then breathing, and finally, a familiar voice from someone long dead, whispering the phrase, "Why didn't you wait for me?" Several recipients required hospitalization for trauma. One woman jumped from her balcony after the 5th call. The military sealed the hangar completely. Hazmat suits were required. Contact was limited to remote cameras, but even those began failing, not mechanically but visually. The footage showed subtle movements inside the plane, a passenger's head turning, a hand twitching, a smile that wasn't there before, but every time they reviewed the footage later, the tape was blank. Investigators cross-checked dental records. Every single passenger had a match, except one. Seat 14B. A man with no ID, no dental, no fingerprint record. He had no next of kin, no birth certificate, no boarding log. And his seat was the only one still warm, hours after the plane went dark. The body never decayed. And one night, it was gone. Rivera's family received a letter postmarked with no return address. Inside was a photo, a blurry image of Rivera reflected in a plane window. But he was inside, sitting among the passengers. Same uniform, same expression, but no one remembered him ever boarding. His wife said the face looked peaceful, too peaceful, as if he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Meanwhile, the plane itself began to change. The exterior corroded overnight, but the interior remained untouched. Lights flickered on and off in patterns, matching Morse code. The message: "We didn't come alone." Security logs showed the plane's door opening at 3:17 a.m. No one entered, no one left. But every time it opened, someone disappeared within 48 hours. The last technician to speak on record said this: "It's not a haunted plane. It's a door. Something else used it. Something that never wanted to go back." And then he went quiet. His house was found empty the next day. No sign of struggle. Only a single mirror left, shattered in the hallway, and on every shard, the reflection of the plane, even though it was miles away. Chapter 4. The Passenger in 14B. Of all the passengers aboard Flight 914, only one defied explanation. Seat 14B, middle row, aisle side. He appeared in every recovered photo of the flight. Blurry, even in sharp images, wearing a grey suit with no brand tag, no wallet, no ID. Dental records? None. Fingerprints? Not in any US or international database. Facial recognition? Inconclusive. He was a ghost with skin, present, but impossible to place. Initial autopsy was blocked. Every time his body was moved, the temperature in the room dropped by 10 degrees. Medical instruments failed, needles bent, scalpels rusted overnight. One examiner suffered a seizure after touching his wrist, reportedly whispering, "He's not done," before collapsing. After that, the body was stored separately in a steel containment unit. Even then, it made noise. Night guards reported faint tapping from inside the storage room. Once, the sound of breathing. One technician swore he heard his own voice coming from the room, begging to be let out. They rotated staff weekly after that, but the events continued. The final straw came when security footage showed something unexplainable. At 2:13 a.m., the body of 14B sat up, blinked, and then laid back down. They reviewed the footage frame by frame. In one still, 14B was looking directly into the camera, but his eyes weren't the same as in the earlier photos. They were black, not empty, just vast. And behind his seat, in the reflection of the cabin window, there was another shape, tall, insect-like, watching him, watching us. His file was marked Unknown Entity. A linguist was brought in to examine symbols found scratched under his fingernails. They weren't letters, they weren't numbers, they were coordinates to a region in the Atlantic with no landmass. Coordinates where no black box was ever found. Coordinates where radio signals vanish. An analyst tried to cross-reference the symbols with ancient scripts. He found a partial match in a 12th century text banned by the Vatican. The same markings appeared in a story of a messenger who traveled through mirrors to deliver warnings. Warnings of doors left open too long. Warnings of things that ride inside human skin. And always, the messenger sat in the center. Always, in seat 14B. Attempts to destroy the body failed. Cremation machines malfunctioned. Acid tanks froze. Even fire refused to touch him. The last attempt involved a classified containment protocol. But when the lead agent entered the room, he screamed for 5 seconds, then fell silent. They found him catatonic, rocking in place, whispering, "He's awake inside me." 3 days later, the body vanished. No breach, no broken locks. It was simply gone. Security footage corrupted, except for one still frame, frozen at 3:17 a.m., showing an empty slab and the words "seat taken" carved into the wall. No one knew what that meant, but no one wanted to find out. Reports soon surfaced from other airports. People claimed to see a man in a grey suit sitting in waiting areas, never moving. Sometimes on planes about to take off, just staring at passengers until someone complained. Every photo came out blurred. Every time he was approached, he was gone, vanished between one blink and the next. And always, seat 14B was empty. One final document recovered from an encrypted drive contained only 3 sentences. The passenger wasn't lost. The plane was the vessel. And now, something else is flying. The file deleted itself seconds later. Chapter 5. Static. The silence was supposed to bring peace. After weeks of hallucinations, disappearances, and unexplained activity, the plane had gone quiet. No more movements, no more signals. No more shadows in the reflection of hangar windows. For 48 hours, the containment team reported nothing unusual. The press cooled down. The theories drifted into forums and blogs. But silence was never safety. It was only the breath before the scream. It began with a flicker, a minor glitch in the communication systems of Air Traffic Command at Langley. Operators noticed random static on the backup channel, nothing alarming at first, until the static formed a rhythm, then tones, then a voice. One that sounded old, tired, and very familiar to those who remembered Flight 912. Flight 914, requesting clearance, JFK Tower, do you copy? The voice was unmistakable. Captain Michael Thompson, same vocal patterns, same tone, but the audio was impossible. The man had died. The plane had returned 37 years later, and no one had ever recovered any live cockpit audio until now. The audio repeated in loops, each time with subtle changes. First it was just static, then words, then names. Operators' names, dead passengers' names. One air traffic controller quit on the spot after hearing his father's voice, who had died aboard 914, not calling for help, but whispering, "We never landed." Recordings were analyzed. Frequency patterns didn't match known radio bands. They came from somewhere in between, frequencies that didn't exist on any spectrum. One analyst tried mapping the waveform and discovered symbols. Ancient, repeating glyphs forming shapes that looked like flight paths, but not earthly ones, curved, infinite, looping back on themselves like serpents devouring time. Meanwhile, radios across the country began picking up the same broadcast. Car radios, emergency scanners, even baby monitors, the same voice. Captain Thompson pleading for clearance, but with an undertone of panic that hadn't been there before, as if he knew someone, something, was listening in. And whatever it was closer now. Journalists caught wind of the anomaly. A pirate radio station aired the transmission for 24 hours straight. Listeners began reporting strange side effects, nosebleeds, vivid dreams, and in some cases, obsessions. One man drove to an abandoned airfield, claiming he had to wait for Flight 912. He stood there for 36 hours straight, murmuring, "The runway is open. The sky is listening." That same night, all flight control centers along the East Coast experienced coordinated blackouts. Exactly at 2:13 a.m., the timestamp of Flight 914's mysterious landing. When systems came back online, every monitor displayed the same message. We never stopped flying. No source, no code, no access logs. In Caracas, where the plane had landed, a journalist sneaked into the perimeter and got within 100 meters of the hangar. He live-streamed. Thousands watched as his camera glitched, then focused on the cockpit window. A figure stood inside, not seated, standing and watching. The feed went black. He hasn't been seen since. Now the static has a pattern. Every 12 hours it resets. But the message evolves, from clearance requests to warnings, from warnings to commands, and the last recorded phrase, captured just hours ago, was not in Captain Thompson's voice. It was a chorus, dozens of voices, all speaking at once. And they said, "You heard us, now answer." Chapter 6, The Black Box. For weeks, the black box from Flight 914 sat silent, untouched, unresponsive. Teams of analysts, engineers, and intelligence agents tried to extract data. Nothing. The memory was supposedly corrupted, unrecoverable. But then, on the 7th night after the radio signals began, the box turned itself on. No one touched it, no power source was connected, yet its red light blinked, and the room filled with sound. It started with the captain's voice, calm, focused. Flight 914, maintaining altitude 33,000 feet, clear skies, normal, routine, until 37 minutes in. Suddenly the audio was drowned in a deep, grinding hum. Not engine noise, not static, something alive, a frequency that vibrated in the chest, like the sound of metal bending under pressure or bones cracking in slow motion. Then came the panic. Thompson's voice, shaking, confused. "We've lost visual." Thick fog, no response from tower. Something's wrong with the sky. A second voice joined. First Officer Daniels. "It's not fog, Mike, it's moving. I think it's watching us." A scream was heard in the background, female, maybe a flight attendant. Then silence, then laughter, not human, wet, mechanical, too close to the mic. The recording jumped. 3 hours missing. Then a single sentence from the captain. "I don't know where we are. The stars aren't right. Nothing's moving." We're inside something. More jumps, more missing time, and then suddenly, we didn't land, we were let go. The last words from Captain Thompson, followed by what sounded like echoes, repeating his voice in reverse. Investigators tried pausing the recording. It wouldn't stop. The volume kept rising. Even unplugged, the black box kept playing. The lights in the facility dimmed. The walls shook. One agent began bleeding from the ears and collapsed, whispering, "It's still in the loop. We're trapped in the loop." The recording ended with a phrase not from the cockpit, but from somewhere deeper. "You opened the sky." Forensic analysts isolated background layers. They found signals buried beneath the human voices, voice patterns in languages never spoken on Earth. One match came from a 1965 SETI recording labeled Unintelligible Signal of 7. Another waveform mirrored the chant structure used in Sumerian ritual tablets, but none explained what the final layer held. A voice matching every registered passenger on the plane, speaking in unison, in perfect harmony, and saying, "We are not alone. We were never alone. We were theirs." Security protocols failed. The black box was placed in a sealed container lined with lead. Still, it broadcasted, not through wires, through dreams. Staff members across the site reported identical nightmares, a cabin filled with frozen bodies. Then one by one, they turned their heads and whispered in reverse, "You're on the next flight." One technician tried destroying the device. He took a hammer to the casing. The tool shattered. He broke his hand. He screamed, "It spoke to me." When questioned, he wept and said, "It knew my name before I was born." He was later found in his cell, dead from self-inflicted wounds, except for one impossible detail. He had written the entire flight log from Flight 914 on the wall in the captain's handwriting. The government ordered the device to be flown to a black site in Alaska. The flight never arrived. Radar tracked it for 2 hours until it vanished. Exactly at 9:47 a.m., the same minute Flight 914 disappeared in 1984. No wreckage, no transmission. Just a blinking light on a radar screen, and then nothing. The original black box was gone, but that night, across 5 airports, control towers received a final simultaneous transmission. A whisper across frequencies, barely audible. 5 words, no voice, no source, just sound from the dark. "You're cleared for departure." Chapter 7. Possession. It began with Agent Keller. He was the most stable of the containment team, former Navy, decorated, no history of trauma. But after the black box incident, he changed. At first, it was subtle. He spent longer hours staring at the hangar monitors. He requested night shifts. He refused breaks. Colleagues said he seemed quieter, but not calm, just muted, like someone holding back a scream. Then came the voices. He started repeating radio calls in his sleep, word for word. Tower to Flight 914, Flight 914 to Tower. Sometimes he'd speak in static, not mimic it, actually produce it. As if his throat had turned to interference. Recordings from his quarters captured whispers when no one else was in the room, not in his voice, not in any human voice. Just layers of breath saying, "He flew too close." Doctors were called in. Neurological scans showed heightened brain activity in language centers, but not his native tongue. Patterns resembled dead dialects, ones that hadn't been spoken aloud in millennia. His pulse matched aviation signals. His dreams were charted like flight paths, and when questioned about the plane, he smiled for the first time in days and said, "I've been inside it. It remembers me." Others began to slip. Technicians developed nosebleeds. Pilots on nearby flights heard static in their headphones even with comms off. A psychologist on site stared into a mirror for 6 hours straight and refused to speak again. Her notes, written just before she went silent, said, "We're not watching the plane." The plane is watching us. Keller's condition worsened. He no longer responded to his name. Instead, he signed his reports as Captain Michael Thompson, but in a hand older than his own, with a slant matching the 1980s logbooks. During one interview, he looked straight into the camera, tilted his head and whispered, "We never landed." They tried isolating him. No electronics, no sound, no light. Still, he spoke. To the walls, to shadows. Sometimes to the cockpit, even though he wasn't near the hangar. He recited checklists, altitudes and coordinates with impossible accuracy. Then he said something that silenced the entire facility. "The door is open. One of you will fly next." Agents began quitting. Some vanished entirely. One left a voicemail saying, "I keep hearing my son calling from inside the plane, but he was never on it." Another woke up with flight maps drawn on his arms, ones that didn't match any known routes. They led to ocean coordinates, where compasses refused to point north. One night, Keller escaped his containment cell. No alarms were triggered. No cameras caught his movement. But a single audio file appeared on the base computer system, time-stamped 2:13 a.m. It was his voice, but layered, merged with hundreds of others, all speaking in unison, cabin ready, awaiting clearance. Then silence, then static, then screaming. Dozens of voices, inside one man. They found him standing in the hangar facing the cockpit, smiling, and behind him, reflected in the plane's window, Captain Thompson was standing. Identical uniform, but his eyes were black glass. No whites, no pupils, just endless reflection. Keller turned slowly and said, "It picked me, and it's hungry." He collapsed seconds later, dead, but his body didn't decay, didn't cool, didn't rot. And every time someone tried to remove it, the plane's systems powered back on, for just a second. Showing one message on its main console, one seat occupied. Chapter 8, The Breakdown. It started with screens. Every television in a hotel in New Jersey froze at the same time. Airports, hospitals, homes, all showed a single frame. An aerial view of a plane, mid-flight, with no visible markings, no number, no airline, just a slow circling motion across the clouds. Then came the words, "Next departure, boarding now." And then, all power failed. Elsewhere, clocks stopped at 2:13 a.m. The same minute Flight 915 had vanished. Phones rang with no caller ID. If answered, the person on the other end would whisper, "We're still flying. Can you hear the sky?" Some never hung up. They just stared forward, listening, and hours later walked out into nowhere. Traffic control centers began to collapse. Pilots reported false runways, phantom aircraft, and red lights hovering in formation. One tower operator watched a plane descend, only for it to vanish just before touchdown. Surveillance footage confirmed the plane was never there, but every witness remembered hearing the engines. And one child on a nearby flight drew a picture. A plane with human eyes for windows. Mental health facilities overflowed. Patients, old, new, previously stable, all repeating the same phrase. "I hear the engines at night." One man gouged out his eardrums, screaming, "It's still boarding!" Others scribbled symbols in blood, the same coordinates from the passenger in seat 14B. Psychiatrists were baffled, but those who stared at the drawings too long, they started hearing voices too. Broadcast stations were hijacked, radio hosts lost control of their shows, static would cut in. Then recordings of the Flight 912 transmission would bleed through, even on stations that weren't live. One host kept saying, "I can't stop hearing him. He's inside the booth." He was found dead, his headphones melted into his skull. His final words were scratched into the desk, cleared for departure. Back at the hangar, something shifted. The plane began to sweat. Condensation pooled on the windows. From the inside, despite being sealed, the temperature dropped below freezing. Inside the cockpit, lights flickered. In the cabin, silhouettes began to appear, not moving, just watching. And the black box, still missing, began broadcasting through nearby car radios. Civilian sightings flooded social media. People across the country filmed a plane in the sky, silent, low, unmarked, always flying in circles. Sometimes passengers claimed to see figures walking in the aisles. One man said he saw himself in the window. A child in Colorado told his mother, "That plane wants me to get on." That night, he disappeared from his bedroom. Government response collapsed. Servers crashed. Classified emails leaked. Documents suggesting Flight 914 may have been the result of an aerospatial incursion, that it entered something between time zones, and whatever came back wasn't just the plane. One file ended with a chilling prediction. If the cycle completes, reality will fracture. The flight path will become permanent. Below it, a handwritten note: shut down all runways, now. But it was too late. At 2:13 a.m. on a global scale, every airport in the world received the same phantom transmission. Flight 914 now arriving. Please stand by. In every country, in every language, with perfect local accent. No source, no delay, just arrival. And in satellite images taken at the same moment, a second moon appeared briefly, then vanished. The breakdown wasn't loud, it was quiet, subtle, just a slow forgetting. People forgot what day it was, forgot how long they'd been awake, forgot who they were waiting for at the gate, but all remembered one thing: the sound of a plane that shouldn't be there. And when they looked to the sky, they saw it, not landing, not crashing, just circling, patiently, waiting for boarding. Chapter 9, The Manifest. The list appeared with no fanfare, no printer ran, no file was opened. One morning, a single sheet of paper sat atop Agent Wallace's desk, unmarked, unfolded, untouched, and yet the ink was fresh. Titled simply, Manifest, Flight 914, Final Revision. The handwriting was unlike any known style, sharp, flowing, ancient, like something written before language had shape. The first 10 names matched the original passenger log, except each one now had an added note: deceased, still aboard, returned, not recovered, occupied. But then came a name that wasn't on any record. Eleanor Shaw, age 6, status boarding. Investigators froze. That was the name of the girl who vanished from her bed in Colorado last week. She'd never been on the plane, until now. Then more appeared, one by one. The list rewrote itself as eyes moved down the page. Names materialized in real time. Victims of unsolved disappearances, people never linked to Flight 914. A truck driver from Arizona who vanished in 2002. A teacher from Ohio last seen boarding a subway. A pilot declared dead after crashing into the ocean, except his name was marked, transferring from Flight 370. The implication hit like a bomb. This was bigger than Flight 912. This was all of them. Every ghost flight, every missing person, every child who vanished without a trace. They weren't abducted, they were selected. The list was alive. An evolving roster of passengers chosen for a journey no one remembered boarding. Worse still, there were names of people still alive. People working at the base, security guards, scientists, journalists who had covered the story. One name was circled in black ink: Agent Wallace. Status, final call. He collapsed after reading it. In his last coherent words, he whispered, "I never bought a ticket." The bottom of the manifest held a second section, no longer names, but roles. One labeled communicator, one labeled recorder, one labeled navigator, and one simply marked empty seat, awaiting voice. No one knew what that meant, but as researchers tried to photograph the page, the ink began to melt. Letters bled down the paper, spelling one word: fly. That night, the manifest disappeared, but it didn't vanish, it spread. Pages began appearing in mailboxes, in locked filing cabinets, inside books that were never opened, always the same header, Flight 914, boarding sequence, always new names. One reporter received the list in her inbox, only to find her own name at the top marked Delayed, Approaching Gate. Online forums exploded with rumors. People claimed to dream about the list. They remembered names they'd never seen. They felt drawn to terminals, drawn to gates that didn't exist. Airlines denied any connection, but one former employee anonymously posted, "We have a terminal that never appears on maps. We call it Terminal X. Planes land there, but they're never on schedule." The account was deleted seconds later. At the base, a final test was conducted. They fed the manifest into a scanner. It printed back one message: "You are already boarded." Seconds later, the facility lost power. The plane's engines powered on. No fuel, no pilot, no crew. Just the sound of turbines spinning and the cabin lights flickering in rhythm, as if counting down. Now, no one can remember who made the list, or when, or why. But people across the world keep hearing their names in static, in dreams, in reflections, and always with the same final whisper: final boarding call. Please take your seat. Chapter 10. Departure. The day came with no warning, no alarms, no press release, just a shift in the wind that no one could explain. The sky turned a shade between dusk and dawn, a color not registered in any spectrum. Birds stopped flying, insects went silent. And at exactly 2:13 a.m., every clock in the base froze, then began ticking, backwards. Inside the hangar, the plane pulsed with light, not from electricity, from something older, organic. It breathed. The walls of the fuselage expanded and contracted like lungs. The cockpit windshield fogged from the inside, and the front cabin door creaked open on its own. Slow, patient, inviting. No one approached, not at first. But one by one, the staff began walking toward it. Security officers, technicians, janitors, doctors. Some cried, some smiled, most didn't speak. They moved like they were hearing music. But there was no sound, only the hum of a machine that was never built, just grown. Outside, across the world, others felt it. People left their homes, walked into streets, stared at the sky. Planes that weren't scheduled began appearing above cities, glowing, silent, unmarked, but all shared the same flight number on their hull, 914. And in every airport where the lights still worked, gates flickered to life. At the base, Agent Wallace awoke in his room. He had a boarding pass in his hand. He didn't remember falling asleep, didn't remember printing anything, but it had his name, his seat, his role, observer. He stood, walked to the hangar, and saw the others entering the plane. He didn't try to stop them, he just watched. And then he followed. Inside the plane, the cabin looked normal, until it didn't. Rows stretched longer than the fuselage allowed. Passengers sat still, eyes closed, mouths slightly open, like they were dreaming. Some were children. Some had rotted skin. Some looked like reflections of people Wallace knew were alive, or dead, or both. As he passed seat 14B, it was empty, but warm. A whisper came from the intercom. Departure imminent, all passengers aboard, flight time irrelevant. He reached his seat, 22A, sat down, and buckled in. The lights dimmed, the hum grew louder, and then silence. Outside, the ground shook. The plane lifted without engines, without wheels, without force, just ascended. Like a thought returning to its source, and when it reached the clouds, it didn't disappear. It unfolded, like a page turning inside out, vanishing into dimensions not yet named. Back on Earth, all records of Flight 914 were deleted. Newspapers turned blank, videos corrupted, memories faded. People remembered something, a flight, a name, a number. But never the full story, never the full image. Only a sound, distant engines, and a voice saying, "Please take your seat." In the void it left behind, a new gate appeared at every major airport. Gate X. No schedule, no agents, but always an empty plane parked nearby. No crew, no flight plan, just a sign flashing, "Now boarding." And if you listen closely at night, you'll hear them. The engines, the whispers, calling your name. They searched for answers through satellites, black boxes, blood and memory. But in the end, the truth was simple. Flight 914 never returned. Not really. What came back wore its shape, its voice, its number, but not its soul. Because something else had boarded that day, something that never left. And it's still flying. Governments erased the records. Reporters went missing. Memories blurred into fog. But sometimes, at night, people still look up and feel watched. Still hear a hum above the clouds. Still see a flash in the sky where no plane should be. And once in a while, a gate opens in an airport that doesn't exist on the map. And someone walks through, never to be seen again. Maybe you'll hear it someday. That faint static in your radio. That voice calling your name while you sleep. Maybe you'll get a ticket without knowing. Maybe you already did. And if one day you find yourself at a terminal that feels wrong, with a plane that looks too quiet, don't board. Because Flight 914 is still collecting souls, and yours might be next.